Welcome everyone. We're almost ready to start our event today. We're just gonna wait 2 minutes so that people can see that we're live and we wait for them to join. Bem-vindo a todos, bem-vindo a todas as pessoas. A gente vai esperar 2 minutos para que o evento comece, para que as pessoas possam ir entrando aqui na nossa live.
Did Kanan make it on? Did I just see him? Is Kanan here?
I don't see Kanan though. I was just checking that it's not connected to INN's Instagram though. It says unable to connect.
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I don't see it connected to my Instagram account either for Underground Scholars.
It's saying unable to connect here to me. A gente tá tentando fazer aqui, amigo Daniel, para que conecte ao nosso Instagram, que não tá aparecendo.
Perfeito. Tu vai falar comigo pela ligação?
Isso, quando eu parar de fazer aquela introdução que tá em português no texto. Aí eu te ligo pelo WhatsApp.
Porque o meu telefone, infelizmente, está servindo de qualidade.
Porque vai ter que arranjar outra coisa, amigo, senão não vou conseguir traduzir. Danny, is it connected at Underground Scholars?
It's not.
Yeah, same here.
É porque vai começar daqui a 2 minutos, não é isso?
Isso, yeah, Johnny is checking that right now. It's saying that Incarceration Nation's Instagram, it's like it's connected here. I have the information, but it says there's an error and it's saying unable to connect. Let's just wait 5 minutes more so we can try to fix this and then we start. Were you able to do it, Denny, on your side?
Nope.
Okay, I think, yeah.
I don't think it's we're probably not on the business account setting, trying to figure that out. It's not streaming on my end, unfortunately.
Yeah, So maybe let's just continue. This is being recorded. We can just post it in the future.
Sounds good.
Okay. So we'll just continue. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to our event today. Today we're hosting a critical conversation on the California Mandela Campaign, the United Nations Mandela Rules for the Treatment of Incarcerated People, and the experience of solitary confinement from a global perspective. My name is João Barbosa. I'm from Brazil, and I'm the Latin America team leader at Incarceration Nations Network, or INN. I'm based out of Montreal, Quebec, so good afternoon, everyone. Today's event is being restreamed. The Unlock the Box and the National Religious Campaign Against Torture pages and social media profiles. We had some issues with streaming on the Underground Scholars and Incarceration Nations Network pages, but we'll make sure to post the event after today's event is done. Today, we're joined by a distinguished group of international fellows representing the Incarceration Nations Network 2024 cohort of the Global Freedom Fellowship Program. Each panelist today has experienced solitary confinement during their incarceration in their respective country, and they all bring a unique perspective to this critical conversation on the goal of their California Mandela Campaign to end solitary confinement in California jails, prisons, immigration, and youth detention centers. To give an overview of the California Mandela Campaign, the Assembly Bill 280, also known as the California Mandela Act, clearly defines what constitutes solitary confinement across all facilities and sets limits on how it can be used. This bill ends the use of solitary confinement for specific populations, including those with disabilities, pregnant women, and other vulnerable populations. The AB 280 is championed by the California Mandela Campaign, which is a coalition focused on ending the use of solitary confinement in California. The California Mandela Campaign is named in honor of Nelson Mandela, who endured solitary confinement during his imprisonment in South Africa. So this campaign advocates for humane treatment and the reentry of incarcerated individuals into society. The campaign aims to address the psychological and physical harm caused by prolonged solitary confinement and promote legislative changes to improve the conditions within the jails, prisons, immigration, and youth detention centers in California. Now, I'll also give an overview of Incarceration Nations Network, or INN, and some of the work that we do globally. We are a global network, and we support, instigate, and popularize innovative prison reform and justice reimagining efforts around the world. We're based in between New York City in the United States and Cape Town in South Africa, and we are a partner-led organization with 132 partners in more than 40 countries. Our work is globally minded and focused on systemic change, and we work with some global projects run by us in partnership with other organizations, as well as by supporting and connecting partners and organizations working in their local communities and countries. At INN, we're committed to transnational solidarity and intersectionality. So we work toward a world without prisons and ensuring that those directly impacted by the justice system lead the way to its radical reimagination. So one of our projects, the Global Freedom Fellowship, which is a transnational project, brings together formerly incarcerated individuals from around the world to collaborate, share their experiences, and advocate for prison reform on a global scale. It's a 2-week-long fellowship that happens in between Cape Town and Johannesburg in South Africa. It happens every year, and it nurtures change makers and fosters a shared sense of struggle and success, combating the stigma against people who have been in prison, and also instigating innovative and collaborative justice work worldwide. So if you want to learn more about INN and the work we do, don't hesitate to contact me or to check our website at incarcerationnationsnetwork.org. We're honored today to have with us 4 members of the 2024 Global Freedom Fellows cohort. So the first one is Kanan. Kanan is a legal volunteer at Justice Defenders in Kampala, Uganda. We also have Danielle. Danielle is an anti-racist social educator at Mamatula Institute in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. We also have Danny. Danny Murillo is Associate Director and co-founder of Underground Scholars at the University of Berkeley, Los Angeles, California, in the United States. And also James Leonard, a community worker, criminologist, and podcaster at James and Gillian's podcast from Cork City, Ireland. Sadly, Jody Pope from the US and Kaketso from South Africa, they couldn't be here with us today due to personal issues, but for sure their contributions will definitely be missed. and we can wait to hear from them in future opportunities. Our discussion today will be facilitated by James Leonard, who will ask a couple of questions to each of our esteemed panelists, and then James will take questions from our virtual audience. So don't hesitate to ask questions in the section, the Q&A platform. And that's it. I hope you all have a great event. Engage with the panelists and ask questions. And James, I pass it to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Joe. Great introduction. It's great to be here with my peers on an important topic. I'll give you myself before I start. Suppose I have, like the rest of the panelists here, experience of incarceration myself. For over the course of 10 years, I was in addiction to heroin, and I ended up in prison because of that, in and out, in a cycle of addiction, prison, for fairly minor offences related to drug and alcohol use. I was lucky enough to get myself into recovery in 2013, and I helped to rebuild my life through education. I did a basic 1-year course in a community college on psychology and social studies. I did a bachelor's degree in social science, youth and community work, and I did a master's degree in criminology. I'm hoping to start my PhD this year, and I have a work experience in the youth and community sector, mainly addiction services, homeless services, and working with people in prison. I shared my story on national TV in 2020, and it had a huge impact. I got so many people from Ireland and beyond contacting me looking for information and guidance and advice. So out of that, I started a podcast, the Two Norries podcast, with my friend Timmy, where I indirectly answered all these queries. Over time, we were able to get the podcast streamed into the prison cells in all the prison cells in Ireland, because in Irish prisons, everybody has a TV. And during COVID, because there was no visits or physical visits, they had to put the prisons on a network for video calls. But a byproduct of the prison being on a network is you can stream stuff into the cell. So there was a report recently on mental health in prisons, and the podcast that we did was heavily cited on the benefits that the people inside had. So I finished that podcast. I'm starting a new one with my wife, Gillian. So look out for that. I'm connected to Incarceration Nation Network through the Global Freedom Fellowship Program, where I met the panelists here today. We had many discussions on that trip, and this event came from those discussions. So I'm delighted to be here. Before we get into the panelists, I suppose if we look at the situation in Ireland with regards to solitary confinement, so Danny was telling me where he's from in Auckland, in Pelican Bay Prison is known as the Shoe. Some other places is known as the Hole. In Ireland, solitary confinement is known as the Block. And according to a report by the Irish Penal Reform Trust in 2017, 10% of the prison population was held in solitary confinement, 22 or 23-hour lockup, and most of them were prisoners on protection. So people seeking protection. So they're on a restricted regime because of that. Others then is for punishment and security or whatever. So in 2017, the Committee Against Torture, in its concluding observation, stated that in an Irish context, the regime for holding prisoners requiring protection is inadequate, including lack of outdoor exercise and almost no contact with the outside world. Our Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee, whom I interviewed recently, she recently stated that Ireland is working towards adopting the Mandela Rules, but not there yet. Under Rule 62 of the Prison Rules 2007, a governor who runs the prison, that's what you might call prison warder where you're from, a governor may decide for the maintenance of good order in the prison to remove a prisoner from the general population or structured activity. The detention of a prisoner under this rule must be reviewed by the governor every 7 days. Where a prisoner is detained under Rule 62 for more than 21 days, the governor must get permission from the Director General and give weekly updates advocating for the extended detainment in solitary confinement for the person. Unfortunately, there's no recording or publication on the length of time individuals spend. So we don't know if there's people in there for 1 month, 6 months, a year, which is unfortunate. But hopefully we get that research in the near future, because it is vital, as we all know here. So if I get into the questions with the panelists, and we'll kick it off with my good friend Danny Maria over in Auckland. How are you, Danny? You're on mute, I think.
Yes, I am. How you doing, James? Nice to see you.
Yeah. You're on mute is the new thing that we have all around the world from COVID, isn't it?
Yes.
All right, Danny, first off, can you share your experience and conditions of solitary confinement in the state you're from and how it's impacted your life? And does the Mandela Rules apply in your state?
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Danny Murillo, Associate Director for Berkeley Underground Scholars. I spent 7 years in solitary confinement in a maximum security state prison in California, a state known for extreme isolation. I was confined to a cell that measured 8 feet by 10 feet for 22 and a half hours to 24 hours a day, often with minimal human contact or environmental stimulation. The psychological torture of solitary confinement can be severe. The following 3 points mark my time in solitary confinement. 1, extreme isolation. The lack of social interaction deteriorates the mental health of those confined under extreme isolation. Number 2, limited stimulation. Minimal access to reading materials, educational opportunities, or recreational activities prevent those confined under extreme isolation from engaging in pro-social activities. Number 3, dehumanizing conditions, constant surveillance, lack of privacy, and the physical constraints of a small barren cell led to paranoia and lack of trust. This serves the interests of the prison authorities, who want incarcerated people to fight amongst themselves and avoid coming together to build trust and solidarity. The prolonged exposure I experienced under these conditions had a profound impact on my mental health and emotional well-being. However, my determination to seek a better life led me to use my time in solitary confinement to begin the transformation of self and prepare for my reintegration to society. When it comes to the Nelson Mandela Rules, formerly known as the United Nations Standards for Minimum Standards for the Treatment of Prisoners, sets out principles for the humane treatment of incarcerated people, including specific guidelines on solitary confinement. Key aspects include of the Mandela Bill. Number 1, prohibition of prolonged solitary confinement. Solitary confinement exceeding 15 days is considered cruel, torture, inhumane, and degrading treatment. Number 2, mental health protections. Recognizes the severe impact of mental health and calls for adequate medical and psychological support. And number 3, human dignity. Emphasizes the respect of inherent dignity of all incarcerated people. And so while the United States has acknowledged the Mandela Rules, full implementation remains extremely inconsistent across all 50 states. Key challenges include, number 1, widespread abuse of solitary confinement. Despite reforms in some states, solitary confinement is still widely used, often exceeding the recommended duration. Number 2, state-by-state variation. Prison policies vary significantly across states, leading to uneven application of the Mandela Rules. Number 3, advocacy and legal action. Organizations and advocates, including incarcerated individuals like myself, continue to push for reform, aligning with the Mandela Rules. Currently in California, our efforts include legislative advocacy, public awareness, campaigns, and sharing our personal stories. In summary, my experience highlights the urgent need to abolish the use of solitary confinement in the United States. However, full adherence to the Nelson Mandela Rule remains a work in progress, requiring ongoing advocacy and systemic change to protect the rights and dignity of incarcerated individuals. I would like to close by sharing a quote from California Assembly Member Chris Holden. And he says, quote, "Torture is torture, no matter what facility it takes place in. The community support for AB 280 has only grown because of people are still suffering, from solitary survivors to loved ones of impacted individuals. Many have reached out saying this legislation would have helped them personally." End quote. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. It's a good quote because when people hear the word torture, they might think of waterboarding or some extreme act of violence. They might not think holding somebody in a cell on their own for 23, 24 hours a day is torture, but it is, and it has a huge impact on the individual. And
we refer to that as no-touch torture. You know, I mean, you're not, like, again, you're not being physically touched, right? But it's no-touch torture. That's just the fact of isolation and no kind of human interaction.
yeah, and in his book, Michel Foucault, Crime and Punishment, he talks about punishment in history, whereas back in the day, a couple of 100 years ago, maybe 300 or 400 years ago, punishment would have been public So you might get a public lashing or something like that. And then over time, punishment became less violent, but it was hidden. And the incarceration and the confinement of people in residential buildings like prisons became the new form of punishment. But holding somebody in solitary confinement for an indefinite nature of time, is that actually more humane than giving them a public lashing in public, you know? So maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's just something to think about. I'm going to come to Kanan next. Kanan, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, my friend. How are you?
Good, very good, very good. So, same question to you, Kanan. Can you share your experience of solitary confinement in Uganda, how it impacted your life, and maybe what the policy is like in Uganda? Does it adhere to the Mandela Rules?
Okay, my name is Kanan Hawa. Solitary confinement in Uganda, the way it is practiced is that we follow the Mandela Rules. The Nelson Mandela Rules came into force in 2015, but before that, the Prisons Act of Uganda of 2006, in Section 81, provides for a maximum of 14 days of solitary confinement on only three main reasons that are provided by the law. And that number one is display or threatening of violence. Number two, if somebody has been captured from escape or there is reasonable belief that they are about to escape. And number three, if solitary confinement is recommended by a doctor, especially for psychiatric, mentally sick people. So for me, as a person, I got to prison in 2017. I was initially sentenced to suffer death. There is only one maximum security prison in Uganda, and that's where all the people who are sentenced to suffer death are kept. Incidentally, because there has not been executions for a long time, the holding cells that used to be held into the people that were about to be executed only days to their executions are the ones now that are being used as cells for solitary confinement at upper prison where I was. And that was my first glance or my first experience with solitary confinement, because people who would be brought in there for solitary confinement would only stay in the condemned section or the death row, even when they were not sentenced to suffer death by themselves. And the conditions there were that you be there for almost within 24 hours, you get 1 hour outside for exercise, to bathe, and the conditions were very terrible. You get 1 meal in 24 hours, and it's very terrible. And my experience later, when I was taken to solitary confinement for the first time, I was only there for 2 days, and we used to call it in prison a prison within prison. And it is the worst scenario that you can think of. And in Uganda, it is reserved for the worst of the worst cases, or the worst of the worst cases that are done in prisons. And yeah, that has been my experience with solitary confinement. And while we were in the Nelson Mandela, when we were in the general GFF, the Global Freedom Fellowship, I beg your pardon, of the INN last year and this year, we had to have that conversation with the colleagues that are here right now, and talked about how solitary confinement is examined in other states. And that's how California came up. And I learned with so much shock that if I experienced it only for 2 days, and I got nightmares that I still experience right now, I was wondering what it is like for people who spend there for years. I was told that it is just recent that it is now a maximum of about 5 years, but at first it would be indefinite. And the Nelson Mandela rules that are advocated for, that we are talking about right now, that are providing the international basic standard, the basic principles of the rules is that all prisoners are supposed to be treated with respect of their inherent dignity, no matter the fact that they are prisoners themselves. And I think it is the most dehumanizing and undignified way of treating any person. Thank you.
Thank you, Canan. You said there, Canan, about having nightmares. Will you speak just a little bit about maybe the psychological impact it had on you then, and if when you were released, if it still had an impact on you, or if you were able to move on from it?
Yeah, when I got out of prison, I saw a psychiatrist, tried to manage it. The nightmares were because the holding cells in the condemn were holding people that were about to be executed. So I would have nightmares of myself getting executed because of the time I spent in solitary confinement. It's very torturing. It's very embarrassing. Sometimes you get things that you don't want to talk about. But with time, ever since I got out of prison, the nightmares have reduced a bit with time. They were more recurrent when I had just gotten out, but with time they are getting reduced a bit.
Yeah. Very good. I don't know if you have this saying in your country, but where I'm from, there's a saying: a problem shared is a problem halved. And if you've an issue in your head that's causing you psychological distress, if you can share that with somebody, you get a new perspective and you can deal with it a bit better. But when you're in solitary, you don't have that luxury because you're on your own. So if I move on to Daniel, in Brazil, please. Daniel, hello.
I think Daniel dropped off.
Oh, he's gone.
We lost him. Yeah, unfortunately, technical issues.
Yeah, he told me he had some technical issues, but he's gonna come back to the call in a couple minutes. So maybe we can go to another questions to someone else, and then we go back to him.
Yeah, okay. Danny, I'll come to you, okay? So as
Awesome. I'll let him know.
Can you hear me, Danny?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so as co-founder of the Underground Scholars Initiative, how do you see education playing a role in the reintegration of formerly incarcerated individuals, particularly those who experience solitary confinement?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me say that a critical education plays a crucial role in the transformation of self and plays an important role in the reintegration of people returning home from prison, particularly those who experience solitary confinement. My experience in solitary confinement and my journey of transformation thereafter provides a powerful testimony to the harsh realities of the prison system and the transformative power of education. During my time in solitary confinement, my dedication to education played a critical role in my transformation and preparation for release. Despite the psychological torture that is solitary confinement, the following 3 points mark my transformation. 1, mental resiliency. Despite the psychological challenges, I developed resiliency through mental and physical exercise. The physical exercise served as an antidote against the extreme isolation, which is known to cause anxiety and depression. The mental exercise, in other words, my education, played a critical role in challenging my belief system and coming to terms with the harm that I've caused myself, my family, and my community. Number 2, community. It was through community with people who were in solitary confinement for 10, 20, 30 years consecutively, along with the conscious racing critical dialogues that happened through the ventilation system, through concrete walls, through the drainage system that inspired my transformation. Through these critical dialogues with those around me, I discovered something that I failed to see in myself, and that was my own humanity. Number 3, educational pursuit. The limited access I had to education while in solitary confinement was enough to inspire and motivate me to continue my education after my release. In 2010, I enrolled in community college, and I transferred in 2012 to the University of California, Berkeley. Education paved the way to reclaim my life and advocate for others in similar situations. As the co-founder of Underground Scholars, or Berkeley Underground Scholars, which focuses on supporting the educational pursuits of currently and formerly incarcerated people and students, I believe the following points highlight the transformative power of education. 1, restoring human dignity and identity. Education can help formerly incarcerated individuals rebuild their sense of self-worth and identity, which is often severely damaged by dehumanizing conditions of solitary confinement. Through education, individuals can rediscover their potential talents and interests, which contribute to a stronger sense of personal dignity and purpose. Number 2, developing critical thinking skills. Academic programs encourage the development of critical thinking, problem-solving abilities, and effective communication skills. These competencies are essential for navigating the complexities of life outside of prison. Creating supportive communities. I'm just going to read them through real quick without getting too much detail. So creating supportive communities, educational institutions, especially programs like USI, offer communities of support and understanding. Number 4, healing and personal growth. The process of learning itself can be therapeutic. Engaging with new ideas, literature, and academic challenges can help individuals process their experience and heal from the trauma of incarceration and solitary confinement. And number 5, empowering advocacy and leadership. Education empowers formerly incarcerated individuals to become advocates for change. With the knowledge and confidence they gain through education, many go on to work in social justice, policy reform, and community leaderships. We bring invaluable insights and firsthand experience that can drive systemic changes. In conclusion, education is a powerful catalyst for change and reintegration for formerly incarcerated individuals, particularly those who have endured the severe impact of solitary confinement. Through initiatives like Underground Scholars, we can create pathways to educational success and social reintegration, fostering resiliency, empowerment, and long-term positive outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. It's incredible work that you're doing in Berkeley, University College Berkeley, with Underground Scholars. Hoping to implement something modelled on that in my local university when I get in under the PhD. But it's really inspirational hearing you speak. And you're right in terms of critical education for us helps us understand our lives, who we are, and it helps restore self-esteem and confidence, because we can internalize a lot of issues that are out of our control. We're no good, we're scumbags, we're junkies, we can't work, we're of no use to society. And then we learn education, and it becomes almost like a tool for personal development. And we begin to challenge these inner self-limiting beliefs we have. And once we do that, then we can move into the process of change or flip the script in our head. So thanks for that, Danny. I'm going to introduce Daniel Diaz in Brazil. Daniel, can you hear me?
Daniel, vai te traduzir agora. Ele está perguntando se tu pode ouvir ele. Tu consegue ouvir todo mundo?
Perfeito, eu consigo ouvir.
Okay, yeah, all good, James. Go for it, then I'll translate the question, and then I'll translate the answer. Ele vai te perguntar ainda antes.
Hi, Daniel. Can you share your experience and conditions of solitary confinement in Brazil, please, and how it impacted your life? And does Brazil adopt the Mandela Rules?
Daniel, tu pode compartilhar com a gente um pouco da tua experiência com confinamento em solitária e como é esse cenário, essa situação no Brasil?
Sim. Então, eu me chamo Daniel, né, eu sou cofundador hoje do Instituto Mamatula. A minha experiência com confinamento solitário foi enquanto eu fiquei privado da liberdade.
My name is Daniel. I'm the co-founder of the Mamatula Institute in Rio, Brazil. My experience with solitary confinement is when I was incarcerated.
Quando eu fiquei no confinamento solitário, por ser uma pessoa trans, num período de 9 meses, foi onde eu passei por muitas tortura física e torturas emocionais.
I was in solitary confinement, and one of the reasons is because I was a trans person incarcerated, and that's when I went through a lot of torture, both physical torture and mental torture.
E esse espaço, de alguma forma, me fazia eu me violentar. Eu me automutilava nesse período que eu ficava dentro dos confinamentos, exatamente por me sentir perturbado da minha cabeça.
And this was a moment where I was also doing auto-mutilation, like mutilating myself with cuttings due to all the pain that I was going through, due to all the torture and the confinement.
E foi onde eu percebi que o confinamento são espaços criados para violação de direito e vi o quanto eles insistem em nos separar do vínculo dos espaços coletivos para nos enfraquecer como pessoa.
And that's when I realized that confinement is a way to harshly take your rights out of you and also take you from your community, from social community, and this reduces you as a person.
Pois sozinho eles acreditam que tem chance de nos vencer.
because alone the system they think they can win over you.
O conto no Brasil é uma forma tão cruel que tem unidade prisional somente com essas políticas de segregacionistas, ou seja, tem unidade prisional somente para o confinamento.
And in Brazil, the situation is so bad and complicated that there are some prison units that are only for solitary confinement. So everyone in that prison unit is inside a single cell going through solitary confinement.
Onde a pessoa fica privada da liberdade, não tem direito nenhum assegurado e fica isolado totalmente. Não consegue receber uma visita, não consegue receber um advogado, e normalmente essas unidades são para pagar castigos.
So the situation in Brazil is that people stay if they're in this prison unit, which is only for solitary confinement. They have no rights. They have no rights to visit. They have no rights for a lawyer to visit them and talk to them there. All of the rights are taken from them.
E uma das ferramentas de punição dentro das unidades prisionais aqui no Brasil é que tem o que eles chamam de parte disciplinar, onde se o guarda não se familiarizar com aquilo que o guarda quer, ele pode te colocar dentro desse isolamento num período de 15 a 30 dias ou mais.
So in Brazil, there's also a punishment tool, which is the prison guard or the official who is there working. If you don't follow what that person is saying, that person is going to punish you with solitary confinement for 15 to 30 days, according to their own arbitrary decision.
É isso.
That's it.
So the thought of prisons being built specifically for solitary confinement is frightening. You know, that people will be sent spend their sentence in that environment. If I can ask, Joe, I want to ask Daniel briefly. Some, like in my country, some people request solitary confinement for their own safety. In Brazil, was Daniel, as a trans person, safe or in solitary or in the general population, or did that even matter where he was?
Ele começou dizendo que é assustador ver essa realidade de unidades prisionais apenas para pessoas que estão em solitária. Ele perguntou que no país dele, às vezes, algumas pessoas, por questão de segurança, elas escolhem e pedem e solicitam para estar em solitária por questões de segurança. Ele está querendo saber se, na tua experiência, como uma pessoa trans que estava encarcerada, se isso em algum momento serviu para você como uma forma de segurança contra a população daquela unidade prisional e se isso acontece ou é uma realidade no Brasil.
Então, a realidade no Brasil ela já é diferenciada, porque por mais que você imagine que está isolado seja uma forma de segurança, o diálogo com a segurança pública dentro dos coletivos não te deixa tão assim, passam essas grades, esses cadeados, entendeu?
The situation in Brazil is even more complicated because even if it might sound that you might be safer in the solitary confinement, you are going to feel insecure and you're going to be tortured and violented, especially because there is a lack of communication between the movements that are outside trying to protect the rights of people incarcerated and the prison administration.
Okay.
E aqui no Brasil já é diferente. Eles utilizam disso para poder separar as pessoas trans, porque dizem que estar separado é uma forma de delas não serem violentadas, mas na verdade é uma forma de invisibilizar a identidade transfeminina delas.
So some people they might use it as an excuse for putting trans people in solitary confinement in Brazil as a safety measure, but in a way this also becomes a way of not making them visible in the prison system by separating them and putting them apart in solitary confinement.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. So we start talking there. Sometimes solitary confinement can be referred to as social death, the loss of identity, social connections, social contacts can just lead to a really nihilistic perspective, which is a depressive place to be. So I'm glad everybody here is in a good place today. Kanan, I'll come to you next.
Yeah.
So in your work with justice defenders, what have been some of the most significant challenges and successes in advocating for prison reform in your country?
Okay, in justice defenders, we first of all work in 3 countries, in Kampala here, Uganda, Kenya, and the Gambia. And especially we offer free legal advice and free legal education and training to people who are indigent and are in prison. That forms almost 90% of the people in prisons here in Uganda, people who cannot afford private lawyers by themselves. The main challenges that we face mainly is, as you would imagine from what I've just said, is the we are overwhelmed by the numbers. There are so many people that cannot afford lawyers. Therefore, that means almost everyone in the stations where we operate in would qualify for the services that we offer, and we cannot be able to serve everyone. For example, in the stations in Kampala, the 4 stations in Kampala that we work in, each station has over about 3,000 inmates, and almost all of them cannot represent themselves in courts of law, and neither can they hire adequate representation services. But even with those challenges, we have registered some milestones and some successes. The main one of which last year we just celebrated 100,000 clients served. That is 100,000 people we have served. And we have been able to train 650 paralegals. That is both inmates and prison staff to work and to represent their own peers within the prisons that they operate. But we have also had 60 people graduate with law degrees, for which I am a beneficiary myself, having joined the program while I was in prison. I studied the law in prison with the University of London. We operate a program with the University of London. We've been partnering with them for years right now. And I graduated with my law degree in 2022 in October. And we are about 60 of us in both Uganda and Kenya. And all of us that have gone through this program are brought back into the project to use the knowledge that we have acquired to defend the people that are in prisons that cannot afford to get lawyers. And the statistics can be many, but I am individually proud of a few cases that I have handled. For example, I was able to support a person have their cases dismissed after 22 years of not having the case heard while I was still an inmate at upper prison. But also through our services, we've been able to streamline the policy of admitting juvenile clients or juvenile prisoners within adult prisons because of through advocacy. And we have been, by last year, by 2019, we had over 40 juveniles in maximum prison. But as I speak right now, there is not even one through our successes, and we are very proud of that. And most recently, I led the team that petitioned the Parliament of Uganda, for people who had been the longest on remand in prison. And these were people who had been in prison because they were of unsound mind. They were mentally sick. They committed the crimes under mental illness, or when they were at trial, they could not stand trial because of mental illness. The law in Uganda had a vacuum. The law would state that they would wait for a minister's order, and no one, the 3 different laws defined 3 different ministers. And because of that vacuum, no such orders had been made for 23 years. And we had a 23-year waiting on remand because they were mentally sick and they were in prison. So last year, I led the team that petitioned the Parliament of Uganda to, number 1, point on who the minister really is, but also number 2, to change that law. And because we were saying that such people belong to hospitals and not in prisons. And fortunately, our petition was adopted by Parliament and it was accepted, and all the orders were being made and those people are getting released. And we are very proud of that success. Yeah.
Thank you, Canan. One side of me wants to celebrate what you are doing and the other side of me is lamenting the fact that so many people need your service. So it's a double-edged sword, but you're definitely needed, and thank you for the work you're doing in your country. So,
Thank you.
So Daniel is gone again, isn't he? So I'll move on to you, Danny, okay? The California Mandela Campaign aims to end solitary confinement in California. What lessons from your global experiences can be applied to the campaign to make it more effective? Or what lessons can be learned from the Mandela Campaign to end solitary confinement in your country?
For sure. So the California Mandela Campaign efforts to end solitary confinement can benefit greatly from global experiences, while also providing valuable lessons for other states and countries aiming to reform their prison system. Here are some key lessons and strategies that can be applied both ways. So these are lessons from global experiences. One, comprehensive legal framework. Countries like Norway and Uganda have implemented strict legal frameworks limiting the use of solitary confinement. Two, alternative to solitary confinement. Scandinavian countries often use alternative to disciplinary measures that focus on rehabilitation rather than on discipline and punishment. Three, integrated mental health services. Countries with more progressive prison systems integrate mental health services into the daily lives of incarcerated people. And then lessons from the California Mandela Campaign. One, grassroots mobilization. The California Mandela Campaign's grassroots approach can serve as a model in a global context. Two, the legislative advocacy. The California Mandela Campaign focuses on legislative change that can inspire similar efforts globally. Three, partnership with legal organizations. Collaboration with legal advocacy groups can strengthen the campaign. This includes filing groups to challenge the legality of solitary confinement practices. And I would also say that these partnerships, not just with legal organizations, but also with mental health service providers, even with students and faculty. Also, number four, and this I think is the most important, the involvement of formerly incarcerated people with direct experience. The inclusion of voices and leadership of those directly impacted by solitary confinement is a powerful strategy. So both lessons from global experiences and the strategies from the California Mandela Campaign can be adapted and applied contextually in different parts of the world. The key is to create a multifaceted approach that combines legal reform, mental health support, community engagement, and ongoing advocacy to effectively end the use of solitary confinement and promote the humane treatment of incarcerated people. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. It's important what you're saying about utilizing the lived experience, because those insights are so valuable. I presented alongside people from the Irish Prison Service last year in an international prisons and corrections conference in Lisbon, with the idea that the prison service would work alongside people with lived experience, former prisoners, around policies around well-being and recovery and stuff like that, was novel in an international context. But there's so much that we can use by bringing people that have walked the walk in to work alongside the policymakers to bring about better outcomes. So thanks for that. I'm going to go back to Daniel Diaz. Daniel, can you hear me?
Daniel, consegue ouvir a gente? Daniel?
I think it's frozen.
Yeah, it's frozen for me too.
Okay.
His internet, and it's unstable, so I think if he doesn't answer, we can pass to another question to someone else.
We've got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to go to Kanan. Okay, Kanan?
Yes, sir.
How do you believe international collaboration and sharing of strategies can strengthen the movement to end solitary confinement globally?
Okay, this is what I think. I think the approach on hard-on crime that I think is the result of the way in which solitary confinement is being administered, especially like in California, the case study that we're having today. I think it is not working. I was checking the statistics of the rates of violence in prisons generally in the USA, even with this solitary confinement and the way it is done almost indefinitely. And the rates keep increasing and increasing all the time. So I think the way we can make this effective is by speaking so much about the failures of the current ways within which prisons is being administered. Prisons are not safe just because of indefinite solitary confinement. The people that are put in solitary confinement are not in any way becoming better. It is making them to be suffering trauma and after another trauma. It is neither making it safe for people in the prison officers or prison administration or the fellow people that are there. I don't think it is. If for example, you took an example of Uganda, where prisons are very underfunded, severely underfunded, and yet we apply and operate on the Nelson Mandela rules, the 14 rule as maximum, 14 days rule. And yet, if you compare the rate of violence in prisons in Uganda, the violence is almost at zero. There is another approach that, and the approach in Uganda is that prisons are prison administered. The discipline, you find that it is the prisoners themselves that govern themselves and provide the safe environment for themselves, and the officers only come in later. You allow them to live in a community in a kind of way that is a community, and it helps so much more than being so hard on crime. So I think, to answer your question, James, the way within which these lessons can make this campaign more effective is to continue to talk about it, talk about the ills of it, but also to give alternatives to the people.
Yeah, and that alternatives piece is key, because if we take the power away from the prison service, because for example, in Ireland, the administration want to adopt the Mandela Rules, but the amount of prisoners presenting through the court system makes it very hard to manage when you have gangs that are trying to be separated and people need to be protected. So it's impossible to adhere to the rules when you have infinite spaces and growing numbers. But the court system and the justice system can, for example, I interviewed a judge from Florida, Broward County. Her name is Judge Wren, and she set up America's first mental health court. So the people you talk about in Uganda that have mental illness, that go into solitary confinement for an indefinite nature because they're illiterate, they can't speak for themselves, they have no representation. In Florida, they won't even go to prison. They go to a mental health court where there's psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, and lawyers on site, and they're offered the support, and then they're diverted away from the system. That can be like one step in reducing the amount of people, you know. So, Danny, I'm going to come to you to end, okay? So, can you discuss the mental health implications of solitary confinement and how Berkeley Underground Scholars helps to address these?
For sure. As we have discussed, solitary confinement is characterized by extreme isolation and minimal human contact, which can have a severe and lasting mental health impact. Key implications include psychological distress, cognitive decline, psychosis and hallucinations, emotional instability, self-harm, and suicidal thought. Now, how does Berkeley Underground Scholars address mental health issues? We provide mental health and wellness support to students we serve through the following resources and services. 1, educational opportunities. Providing access to higher education for formerly incarcerated individuals helps mitigate the long-term mental health impact by offering a sense of purpose and community and intellectual engagement. Peer support networks. Creating support groups where formerly incarcerated individuals can share experiences and support each other, which helps reduce feelings of isolation and despair. Community partnerships, partnering with health and wellness practitioners who provide non-Western healing practices and therapies tailored to the unique needs of those who have experienced solitary confinement. And support groups, establishing support groups for affected individuals, providing a safe space to share experiences and coping strategies. This semester, we facilitated 2 healing circles for our students. And we also do wellness trips to different healing resorts and retreats. Also, by addressing the mental health impact, by addressing the mental health implications of solitary confinement through wellness support, Berkeley Underground Scholars seeks to make significant strides in mitigating and eliminating the harmful effects and promoting more humane treatment of formerly incarcerated students at the university. We might have enough time for a question for Daniel, but that's...
Yeah, we do. And it's important what you're talking about there, Danny, because providing grants and scholarships for learners will increase people enrolling in courses. But what you're speaking about there will retain those people to pursue the degree over the period of time and to counteract the drop-off rate, because people like us have specific sets of challenges and obstacles, and that's why we need that extracurricular support outside of the financial support. So that's great stuff. I'm going to come to everybody for one last question, okay? So if we can keep it brief, I'd be grateful for that. So I'm going to start with Daniel Diaz, so we don't lose him again. What message would you like to send to policymakers about the importance of ending solitary confinement?
Daniel, ele vai fazer uma última pergunta para cada um, que a resposta possa ser breve para que todos possam falar. Que última mensagem ou que mensagem você falaria para políticos e legisladores sobre a importância de acabar com o confinamento em solitária?
We can't hear him.
Yeah, I can hear him, yeah.
We can't hear you.
A gente não consegue te escutar.
Oh,
We'll move on and come back to him.
Então, o que eu diria para os legisladores é que exatamente para se criar um sistema de correção, a gente precisa que esse sistema ele tenha um viés educativo, porque se ele não tem um viés educativo, ele não tem uma ideia de correção, ele tem uma ideia de punir.
It's important to tell the legislators and policymakers in general that if you're creating a correctional or a prison system, that it needs to be based out of education, otherwise it's going to be based out of punishment.
E que esses legisladores possam, de alguma forma, visibilizar os corpos dessas pessoas transfemininas dentro das unidades masculinas, ou que criam iniciativas para que elas consigam ter mais autonomias dentro daquilo que elas acreditam do gênero feminino.
And also the importance for legislators to take into consideration the situation of trans women inside prisons and solitary confinement, so that they'll be able to have their freedom to decide what they want to do.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Daniel. It's no surprise here you're talking about education being from the country that gave us Paulo Freire. So thank you for your contribution today. Canan, same question for you. Briefly, what message would you like to send to policymakers about the importance of ending solitary confinement?
Because of time, I will make only two statements. Number one, that prison, as we know it right now, with everything in it, including social confinement, has its roots to colonialism. It imprisons more people, the most vulnerable societies. And I think that's a very bad policy it should be abolished. Number two, the statistics are out there and they are very clear. Educate the people in prisons instead of putting them in solitary confinement. Education helps people to even change from their crime records and to get better students, become better people. So I think those two things should be considered to the policymakers.
Thank you, Canan. And it's true, ethnicity plays a big role across all prisons in terms of the ethnic minorities make up way overrepresented in prison populations. For example, in Ireland, we have Irish travellers. They make up less than 1% of the general population and 20% of the prison population. Danny Murillo, same question for you briefly. What message would you like to send policymakers about the importance of ending solitary confinement?
Sure. So by ending solitary confinement, California can uphold the Mandela Rules and with it the dignity and humanity of incarcerated individuals and align with international human rights standards. Such as Canan mentioned, solitary confinement, far from improving safety, often exacerbates behavioral problems. Individuals subjected to solitary confinement are more likely to struggle with reintegration upon release. Rehabilitation and restorative justice approaches, which focus on addressing underlying issues and promoting personal growth, are far more effective in reintegration and enhancing public safety. There are proven effective alternatives to solitary confinement, Programs that emphasize rehabilitation, mental health care, conflict resolution, positive behavioral interventions have demonstrated success in reducing the need for isolation while promoting safer and more constructive prison environments. Adopting these alternatives can transform correctional facilities into spaces that support growth, healing, and preparation for life after incarceration. The continued use of solitary confinement contradicts the values of justice, compassion, and humanity. Ending solitary confinement is not only a moral imperative, but a practical necessity. Together, we can create a future where rehabilitation, respect for human dignity are at the forefront instead of discipline, punishment, and solitary confinement. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Danny. I don't know, have we got any questions to answer?
I believe there are some questions.
Is there?
I see one from Eve Michelle. She says, I understand that education brings a level of mental well-being from this trauma. Is it true that these traumas will still live with you after your lifetime or with you for your lifetime? I can go ahead and answer.
Go on, Danny. Go.
I've been out of solitary confinement since 2010, right? And I still suffer from anxiety and depression, right? And I know it, right? And I tried my best to try to figure out ways to battle that depression and that anxiety, right? By trying to create new hobbies, right? That are going to allow me to, find coping mechanisms that'll kind of that'll ground me, right? Yoga, therapy, traveling, things like that, right? Have helped me, figure out ways to cope with my trauma.
Excellent. I think as well, like incarceration in general can have an impact on you. So like if you've been in for a long period of time, your social skills mightn't be what they were. Going to a shop, opening a bank account, trying to get welfare, trying to get a job is difficult when you've been coming from general population. If you've been coming from solitary confinement, it can get overwhelming and lead to a relapse into offending behavior. So if we want to reduce offending, we have to help people while they're inside. The judge and the courts make the judgment. Loss of liberty is the punishment. It's not up to the prison to punish continually. It's up to the prison to rehabilitate and try to ensure that we have less victims in the future. So does anybody else want to answer that question?
Daniel, tu quer responder essa pergunta? Entendo que a educação traz nível de bem-estar mental em relação a esse trauma. É verdade que esses traumas ainda permanecerão com você por toda a vida? Se quiser responder, pode abrir o microfone e dar a resposta. I think Daniel is gonna answer this question as well.
Você pode confirmar, repetir para mim a pergunta?
Posso. Eu entendo que a educação traz nível de bem-estar mental em relação aos traumas que a pessoa tem. É verdade que esses traumas ainda permanecerão com você por toda a vida? Os traumas relacionados a confinamento em solitária.
Sim, né? Eu acredito que o processo de desencarceramento ele é dado degradativamente, sabe? E a gente não consegue estipular se isso vai ser a longo prazo ou se isso vai ser a curto prazo.
Yes, we need to also consider that the decarceration, the leaving prison process is usually very slow, so we don't know, we can estimate how long and how intense the traumas are going to be last after this process.
E dentro da educação, a gente entende que se a educação ela não é libertadora, o sonho do oprimido é se tornar o opressor, dizia Paulo Freire. Então, a educação ela precisa ser efetiva. E aí, degradativamente, a gente vai conseguindo alcançar esse nível de efetividade de redução de danos.
And it's also important to take Paulo Freire's quote that when education doesn't set you free, the dream of the oppressor, the dream of the person being oppressed is to become the oppressor. So that's why it's important to consider education as a role into reducing the harm, reducing the traumas that were felt during the incarceration period.
É isso.
Excellent. Thank you, Daniel. Is there any more questions? That was it, I think, was it? Okay, so listen, guys, it's been a pleasure having this discussion with you all. I hope this reaches the people who need to hear it, including policymakers, practitioners, people with lived experience like ourselves. But most of all, it would be my dream for people currently incarcerated to hear this discussion. In that way, they might look at themselves in a different light. They might identify with some of us here and think, man, I can relate with Daniel, Danny, or Canan, or James, and they've got on with their lives. We might spark change if we can get this to those people. So I'll do my best in my country, and I hope you will too. So I'm going to close it up now and thank our panelists for sharing their invaluable insights, and to the audience joining us today on the many social platforms. We hope this conversation has shed light on the urgent need to end solitary confinement and inspire action towards humane and just treatment for all incarcerated individuals. Please help in whatever way you can, in whatever capacity you can, to advocate for the passing of Assembly Bill 2632, also known as the Mandela Act, the California Mandela Act. We come together from different parts of the world to urge elected officials in California to pass the California Mandela Act. And as a byproduct, I come asking the policymakers to allow people with convictions to enter the United States so we can collaborate in person and not remote. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody, and I wish you a good night, good morning, and good evening, wherever you are in the world.